All right, so today we are going to study about another battle. Yesterday we studied about the Battle of Trenton, where the Americans had a surprise attack on the British, and that was one of the greatest victories from the Americans in the Revolution so far. They had a losing streak. They had a very weak army until George Washington took over. And so after that battle, the American spirits were lifted and they had a lot more energy and a lot more kind of hope to win this war. And so we're going to talk today about another battle that happened after the Battle of Trenton. This battle is called the Battle of Saratoga. Okay. And there were many battles that were fought for land and for control in America between the American colonies and the British. And so yesterday we studied about the Battle of Trenton. And so today we're going to study the battles of Saratoga. And let's read through it together. And you're going to answer some questions. All right. So, battles of Saratoga. The battles of Saratoga were a series of clashes, meaning them going against each other, them going head to head, the Americans and the British, culminating with the Battle of Saratoga and the surrender of British General John Burgoyne. This decisive American victory was a turning point of the Revolutionary War. So, even though they won in Trenton, they still weren't necessarily in the lead. Their spirits were lifted, but the Battle of Saratoga, this victory, actually flipped the war and the Americans were in the lead. So let's talk about the commanders. Who are the head honchos here? The main British leader was General John Burgoyne, nicknamed Gentleman Johnny. Major General Horatio Gates and Generals Benedict Arnold and Benjamin Lincoln led the Americans. So those are the names of the commanders that you'll later fill in. All right, so here's the plan. British General Burgoyne came up with a plan to defeat the Americans by splitting them in two along the Hudson River. With the colonists divided, he was sure they would not be able to stand. Burgoyne was supposed to lead his army south from Lake Champlain to Albany, New York. So General Burgoyne, he's a British general, and he is trying to find a way to beat these Americans once and for all. And so his plan was to split the American army into two, because two smaller armies are going to be weaker than one big army. So he's trying to split up the Americans and defeat them that way. Okay. At the same time, another general, British general, his name was General Howe, planned to advance north along the Hudson River. So he was supposed to go up above the Hudson River. They arranged to meet at Albany. So General Burgoyne and General Howe were supposed to meet together in Albany, New York. Burgoyne and his army successfully advanced south, recaptured Fort Ticonderoga from the Americans, and then proceeded to march south. General Howe had other plans, though. Instead of heading north to Albany, he headed east to take Philadelphia, leaving Burgoyne on his own. So the plan was working well. General Burgoyne and his army successfully followed the plan between him and General Howe, and they went south and they recaptured a fort. They recaptured some land from the Americans. However, General Howe did not follow their plan. General Howe and General Burgoyne had plans to meet up together so that they could both fight together against the Americans. But General Howe decided to ditch General Burgoyne, and he had plans of his own. He decided to, instead of going to meet General Burgoyne, he decided to go east instead of north to take different land, to take Philadelphia, because he wanted recognition. He wanted to be known as somebody who won over land for the British. So this left Burgoyne on his own, no one to fight with him. So General Burgoyne and General Howe were supposed to be working together, but instead Howe ditched Burgoyne, and Burgoyne is now on his own. So we'll see how this turns out. The Americans harassed the British as they continued south by cutting down trees to block the roads and taking shots at the soldiers from the forests. So the Americans knew that the British, Burgoyne, was heading south. And as they were heading south, they would shoot at them from the woods. They would cut down trees to block their path and kind of harass them in that way. Burgoyne's process was slow, and the British started to run out of food. He sent some of the soldiers to Bennington, Vermont to find food and horses. However, Bennington was guarded by American General John Stark. The Americans surrounded the British troops and captured around 500 soldiers. This was a decisive victory for the Americans and weakened the British forces. So as General Burgoyne continued south without his friend General Howe, he started to run out of food. And also the Americans kept harassing his army by shooting at them, cutting down the trees. And because of those blockages, the British were moving very slowly and they started to run out of food. And so Burgoyne sent a group of his soldiers to Bennington, Vermont to find food, but that land was covered by American troops. And so because it was covered by American troops, the Americans surrounded the British and captured 500 of their soldiers. And it was a very, very, very big win for the Americans because it weakened the British. So let's move on. First battle. The First Battle of Saratoga took place on September 19th, 1777, on the farmland of British loyalist John Freeman in New York. Daniel Morgan led 500 sharpshooters to the field where they saw the British advancing. The Americans were able to take out a number of officers prior to the British attacking. At the end of the battle, the British gained control of the field but suffered 600 casualties, twice as many as the Americans. That means that the Americans in this battle only lost about 300 people. The British lost 600 people. So the British actually took over the field that they fought on, but they suffered way more deaths than the Americans did. Second battle. After the Battle of Freeman's Farm, the first battle, Americans set up their defenses at Bemis Heights. The American forces continued to grow as more militiamen arrived. The British attacked October 7, 1777, but failed miserably and were defeated by the Americans. So the Americans, after they lost the land from the first battle, they set up defenses on land called Bemis Heights. The American forces continued to grow as more militiamen arrived. Okay, so the Americans were getting stronger and the British were losing a lot of men. The British attacked, but they failed terribly, and they were immediately defeated by the Americans, and they lost another 600 men. So British casualties mounted to nearly 600 men, and General Burgoyne was forced to retreat, meaning run away. Under General Gates, the Americans pursued the British army and within days had them surrounded. The British surrendered October 17, 1777. Okay, so as you know, in the first battle, the British won that land, but they lost a lot of men. Even though the Americans didn't win the land in the first battle, right here, the first battle, they did not lose as many men as the British did. And in the second battle, the Americans were ready. And because this is their home land, they were ready with more and more men joining their army. However, the British army, this is not their home. They can't just immediately get men to join their army. And so they kept losing and losing and losing people, which caused them to eventually have to surrender. They didn't have enough men to fight off the tons and tons of Americans that were showing up. And so General Burgoyne, the British general, had to surrender to the Americans in this battle, which is why this battle is such a big deal for the Americans. And the British surrendered October 17, 1777. The battles of Saratoga and the surrender of the British army under General Burgoyne was one of the major turning points of the Revolutionary War. The morale, meaning the spirit of the Americans was boosted, and the country now felt it could win the war. We actually have a chance. After this battle, the French also decided to support the Americans with military aid. Remember, the Americans did not have much support. They did not have a lot of organization and materials. But after the Battle of Saratoga, the French decided, oh, actually, the Americans have a shot at winning this thing. They're actually proving themselves. Let's go help them. So this is when kind of more French men come to help the Americans. So what you're going to do is you're going to fill these out as you did yesterday. If you have any questions, you can let me know.